The boy came to the edge of town with nothing but dust on his clothes and hunger pressed so deeply into his bones that even walking felt like lifting stone. His shoes had been lost weeks earlier, somewhere between one closed door and another, and his shirt hung loose on his thin frame as if it belonged to someone else. He was no more than 17, though hardship had already carved years into his face. That afternoon, the sun burned hot over the cracked pavement behind a small roadside diner, and the smell of frying onions and old grease drifted through the air like a cruel reminder of everything he didn't have. He hadn't planned to collapse there. Pride had kept him moving long after his legs begged him to stop. But hunger is louder than pride, and when his vision blurred and the ground seemed to tilt, his body gave up the fight. He fell near the trash bins, where leftovers were sometimes thrown, curling into himself like a wounded animal, hoping no one would notice. She noticed. She was inside the diner wiping tables, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back with a faded scarf. Her name was Amani, and she had learned early in life to see what others ignored. When she took the trash out back, she saw him lying there, motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. For a moment she froze, fear flickering through her mind, but then she knelt beside him and spoke softly, asking if he could hear her. His eyes opened slowly, clouded with exhaustion. Shame rushed through him when he realized he'd been found like this, near garbage, broken by something as simple as hunger. He tried to sit up, to apologize, to explain that he would leave, but his body betrayed him again. "Don't move," she said gently. Her voice carried no judgment, only concern. "You're starving." He didn't answer. Words felt too heavy. Instead, his stomach growled loudly, exposing the truth he had tried so hard to hide. His face burned red, and he turned away. She stood, went back inside, and returned minutes later with a plate of food still warm from the stove. Rice, beans, a piece of chicken, and bread wrapped in a napkin. She placed it beside him as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Eat," she said. Slowly. He stared at the plate like it might disappear if he touched it. No one had offered him food without asking for something in return in a very long time. Suspicion battled with desperation, but desperation won. His hand shook as he lifted the fork, and tears blurred his vision as the first bite hit his tongue. He ate carefully at first, then faster, then stopped, embarrassed by his own hunger. "I can pay you back," he said hoarsely, though he had nothing. "I'll work. I'll clean. Anything." Amani smiled softly. "You don't owe me anything. Just finish your food." That was how it began. He stayed behind the diner that night, sleeping on cardboard she secretly brought him. The next morning, she brought more food. The day after that, water. Slowly, cautiously, trust grew between them, built not from grand conversations but from quiet moments, shared smiles, short questions, the comfort of routine. His name was Elijah. He had come from a town so poor it barely existed on maps, raised by a father who died too early and a mother who worked herself into sickness. When she passed, there was nothing left for him there. He left with the foolish hope that the world would be kinder elsewhere. It wasn't. Amani listened without interrupting, her eyes steady, her hands busy folding napkins or sweeping floors. She didn't pity him, and that mattered more than kindness. She treated him like a person, not a problem. Weeks passed. Elijah grew stronger, helping out behind the diner when the owner wasn't looking, taking out trash, scrubbing pots, fixing a loose hinge. Amani would scold him lightly, afraid he'd get caught, but she was grateful. In his gratitude, he worked harder than anyone ever had. Sometimes, after closing, they would sit on overturned crates behind the diner, sharing leftovers and watching the sky turn deep orange and purple. They talked about small things, favorite foods, places they'd never been, music they remembered from childhood. Laughter came easily, surprising them both. Elijah noticed everything about her, the way she hummed when she was nervous, how her smile softened when she talked about her mother, the strength in her hands that came from years of work. He had never known affection like this, simple and unasked for, and it frightened him how much it meant. One evening, rain poured down hard, drumming against the tin roof. Elijah sat soaked and shivering behind the diner, too proud to come inside. Amani found him anyway and dragged him in through the back door, ignoring his protests. She wrapped him in a towel and sat him near the stove, scolding him for being stubborn. In that moment, something in Elijah broke open. The walls he had built to survive cracked, and fear spilled out. The fear that this warmth would end, that kindness was temporary, that he would always be the boy with nothing. "I hate being poor," he said suddenly, staring at the floor. "I hate that this is all I am." Amani crouched in front of him. "Being poor isn't who you are," she said firmly. It's just where you are. He looked at her then, really looked, and the words escaped before he could stop them. One day, I'll be rich. And when I am, I'll marry you. The room went quiet except for the rain. As soon as he said it, embarrassment rushed in. It sounded childish, impossible. He was a boy with no future promising something he didn't understand. He opened his mouth to apologize, but Amani laughed, not cruelly, not dismissively. Her laughter was warm, surprised, touched. That's a big promise, she said. I mean it, he insisted, though his voice shook. I swear. I won't always be like this. She reached out and tapped his forehead gently. Then you'd better work hard, she teased. Because I don't plan on marrying just anyone. They both laughed, and the moment passed, but the promise stayed. It lodged itself deep in Elijah's heart, becoming more than words. It became a direction. Not long after, opportunity came in the form of a passing construction crew looking for laborious. The pay was small, the work brutal, but it was a chance. Elijah hesitated, knowing it meant leaving town, leaving her. Amani saw the conflict in his eyes before he said a word. You should go, she told him quietly. What if I don't come back? He asked. Then you'll still be better than you were, she said. And that matters. The morning he left, she packed him food for the road. He hugged her tightly, longer than either of them expected. For a moment, neither spoke, aware that something fragile and important was ending. I'll come back, he said. I promise. She smiled, hiding the ache in her chest. I know. He walked away with nothing but a bag of food, a foolish promise, and a heart full of determination, unaware that the kindness of a girl who fed a hungry boy had already changed the course of both their lives. Years carved their way through Elijah's life with little mercy. The construction job led to another, then another, each one farther from the town he had left behind. He slept in crowded rooms, under half-built roofs, sometimes in his car when he finally owned one. His hands grew calloused, his back ached constantly, and more than once he wondered if that promise, spoken by a hungry boy in borrowed warmth, had been nothing more than a dream. But whenever exhaustion threatened to hollow him out, he remembered Amani's voice telling him that poverty was not who he was, only where he was. That memory kept him moving. He learned quickly. He saved obsessively. When others spent their pay on nights out, he took extra shifts. When layoffs came, he volunteered for the hardest work. A foreman noticed his discipline and taught him how to read plans. Another taught him numbers. Elijah absorbed knowledge the way he once absorbed food, gratefully and urgently. By his late 20s, he had started a small contracting business with 2 other men. It failed within a year. He lost almost everything. For weeks afterward, he sat alone in a cheap apartment, staring at the wall, shame wrapping around him like a second skin. He thought of Amani then more than ever, wondered what she would say if she saw him like this, older, tired, still not rich. He almost went back to her then, almost returned empty-handed just to see her face. But pride, that old companion, whispered that he wasn't ready. So he tried again. The second time, he built slowly, cautiously. He took fewer risks, listened more, trusted his instincts. Work turned into contracts, contracts into reputation. By the time he was 40, Elijah owned a thriving construction firm with offices in 3 cities. People called him Sir now. They listened when he spoke. Money came easily, but peace did not. At night, alone in his large, quiet house, he often found himself thinking about a small diner and a girl with a faded scarf. He had searched for her name once, years earlier, but fear stopped him from going further. What if she had moved on? What if she had forgotten him? What if the promise meant nothing to her now? One evening, after attending a charity gala he barely tolerated, Elijah stepped outside for air. A speaker had talked about hunger, about food insecurity, about children collapsing from lack of meals. The words hit too close. Something shifted inside him then, not urgency, but clarity. He realized he had been running toward success when he should have been running back to gratitude. The next morning, he cleared his schedule, got into his car, and drove. The road felt shorter than it had years ago, though every mile tightened his chest. When the familiar town sign appeared, worn and rusted, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. Buildings looked smaller now, but the memories loomed large. The diner still stood, paint chipped, sign faded, stubbornly alive. He parked across the street and sat there for a long moment, breathing, steadying himself. He was no longer the boy who had collapsed behind those walls. But he wasn't sure who he would be once he stepped out. When he finally crossed the street and pushed the door open, A bell rang, bright, unmistakable. The smell hit him instantly. Grease, coffee, warmth. Time folded in on itself. Behind the counter stood a woman with lines at the corners of her eyes and strength in her posture that felt achingly familiar. Her hair was shorter now, streaked faintly with grey. She looked up automatically, ready with a practiced smile, then froze. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Recognition passed between them like electricity, lighting up years of silence. Amani's hand tightened on the counter. Elijah forgot how to breathe. "Elijah," she said softly, as if afraid the name might shatter him. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. Emotion rose fast and sharp. Gratitude, guilt, love, all tangled together. "It's me," he finally managed. She stepped out from behind the counter slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "I knew you'd come back," she said, not as a question, but as a fact. They sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around untouched cups of coffee, talking carefully at first, like people relearning a language. Amani told him about her life, how she had taken over the diner when the owner retired, how she had raised a younger brother, how she had stayed. There had been men, she admitted, but no one who felt quite right. "I think part of me was always waiting," she said, almost apologetically. Elijah looked down at his hands, the same hands that once shook from hunger. "I wanted to come back sooner," he said. "But I was scared. I didn't want to be the boy who promised you everything and delivered nothing." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The touch was familiar, grounding. "You were never nothing," she said. "You were becoming." They talked until the diner emptied and the sky outside darkened. Elijah told her about his failures, his doubts, the nights he almost gave up. He didn't talk about his wealth until she asked, and even then, he spoke of it like a tool, not a trophy. Finally, the moment he had carried for decades arrived. Elijah stood, heart pounding harder than it ever had in any boardroom. He walked around the table and lowered himself to one knee, ignoring the ache in his joints, the stares from the kitchen. "Amani," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Years ago, I was a hungry boy with nothing but hope. You fed me when you didn't have to. You saw me when no one else did. I made you a promise I barely understood, but it became the reason I survived." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm not asking because I'm rich," he continued. "I'm asking because I've been carrying you with me my whole life. Will you marry me?" For a long second, the world held its breath. Then Amani laughed, a soft, trembling laugh through tears, and pulled him up into her arms. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you." The diner bell rang again as the door opened, but neither of them noticed. Some promises, born in hunger and kindness, don't fade with time. They grow.